When it comes to connecting to and transforming data, the query editor is our cockpit. Now, in Power BI, from the Home tab, we've already seen that you can launch the query editor and that there's a lot going on here. We're going to be spending most of our time in this section right here in the editor itself, but let's take a minute and break down the components of this interface. Right above, we've got our query editing tools. This is where we'll find a lot of the tools that we'll use to shape and transform our data. Right beneath that, you'll see this formula bar, and it's got some unfamiliar code in there. This is called M code, and I didn't actually write it. This is code that's automatically generated as you apply different procedures or transformation steps to your table. For those of you who are advanced Excel users, this is exactly what VBA does, as it automatically generates Visual Basic code while you record a macro. Now, don't get nervous because you don't need to even know M code to use the query editor. In fact, we're only going to touch it a little bit in a lecture or two. But just know that you can write custom M code from scratch, or you can edit the M code that's automatically been generated for you, but you don't need it in order to use all of the tools that we're going to cover in this section. All right, so on the left side of the query editor, we've got our queries pane that lists out all of our queries. Here you can see that I've got 9 individual connections or data queries in place, and you can click through each query to see previews of your data. You can edit the properties, change the applied steps. Basically, any modifications that you want to make to an existing query, you can do so here. As you select the individual queries, you'll see this data preview in the middle of the screen update. This is where we can spot check and QA our data and do things like change column types and update headers. On the right side, we've got our properties pane, and the most important thing to call out here is the table name. Now, it's really important to be strategic and clear with your table names right off the bat. One thing to keep in mind is that your table name should be human readable, like territory space lookup. Power BI doesn't really care about spaces in between words and doesn't require the use of underscores or camel case. So there's no need to create your table and column names like you would in a SQL or a relational database. Point here, just try and be strategic with your table names from the get-go. And then last, but certainly not least, the applied steps pane here in the lower right. This is really powerful because what's happening here is that every time you make a change to your data, every time you apply some sort of shaping or transformation operator, Power BI will record an applied step using M code and add it to the list here. And what that means is that every time this connection is refreshed, Power BI will run through these same set of applied steps to shape and transform your data. And this is a fantastic way to automate data cleansing and ETL processes instead of having to manually run the same process over and over and over again each time you connect to the data. So the query editor really automates the process for you, and you can see each transformation as an applied step. Perhaps one of the most meaningful things here is that none of this is actually set in stone. You can click on the X next to any of these individual steps to remove it. You can click through each of your applied steps to actually visually see the impact that it's having on your table, or you can click the gear icon to the right and modify the individual steps within this process. So, moving on to the query editor tools, I want to just take another minute here and introduce the 3 primary tabs or categories. First, we've got our Home tab. This includes some general settings, data source settings, parameters, table properties, etc., as well as some of the most common table transformations. The next tab, the Transform tab, includes additional tools that allows you to modify your existing columns. You can split or group columns, you can transpose your table, extract texts, and much more. And then finally, the Add Column tools actually create brand new columns within your table, and you can define those new columns based on things like conditional rules, text operations, calculations, data operators, etc. All right, so up next, we're going to actually get our hands dirty with some basic table transformations.